January 30th, 1925. Floyd Collins, a determined caver, holds a kerosene lantern as he enters a narrow 5-foot hole. This is not just any hole, it's a sand cave in Kentucky. The cave is tiny, forcing Floyd to crawl on his knees. Pointed stones cover the surface, making his progress slow and painful. He reaches a chute section of the cave, one he had dug a few months earlier. The cave is dark. The kerosene lantern is his last hope, guiding him toward his target. He arrives at the turnaround room, a place so treacherous that even experienced cavers fear to tread and would turn and go back. That is why this section is called the turnaround room. Floyd slowly disappears deeper into the cave. His clothes were torn from all sides as if by sharp crystals, and it was preventing him from moving forward. He was pushing himself forward, using only the support of his feet. Finally, he reaches a wider opening where there is a ledge, and from that ledge, Floyd had to cross over and go 10 feet down. Floyd ties a rope to a stone and carefully crosses the ledge. Now he reached the end of the cave, where Floyd faced a new challenge. He was working on creating another opening, but the space was so tight that no one could fit through. He was trying to dig through this spot to reach the other side of the cave, where there was a large crystal chamber. That place was made of pristine white crystal, a completely new location that didn't exist in this world. Floyd had been removing rocks from the cave for months, and this was his daily routine. So, like every other time, Floyd was finishing his work and dragging himself out, just as he had dragged himself in. The space was so tight that he couldn't even use his hands to help himself out, and he would stop in the middle because his kerosene lantern was dimming. As he moved a little further, Floyd's lantern was knocked from his hand, fell, and broke, leaving him completely alone in the darkness of the cave. The situation had now deteriorated, but Floyd remained relaxed. He was walking alone 60 feet down in the cave, but at that moment, he accidentally placed his foot on a loose rock. A 10-kilogram stone fell onto his ankle. At the same time, several small stones fall onto his foot, and Floyd is trapped in an awkward position. No matter how much force he applied, nothing changed, and each additional effort only caused more small stones to fall on him. The jagged rocks of the cave were pricking him from behind, and droplets of icy water from the cave's ice were falling on his face. Now he had only one option: to call out for help and shout, as he had no other choice. This is a sand cave, and Floyd is trapped in absolute darkness, 60 feet below the surface. Now begins Floyd Collins' fight for survival. Floyd Collins was born on June 20th, 1887, in Logan County, Kentucky. His passion for caving ignited early in his life, and he began exploring caves just 6 years later. From a young age, Floyd was deeply enthusiastic about caving. He would spend hours caving every day, and in fact, sometimes even slept in the caves. It was during this period that he discovered a new cave on his father's farmland in 1917. This discovery thrust him into the midst of the Kentucky Cave Wars. In simple words, the Kentucky Cave Wars involve a vast network of interconnected caves, with Mammoth. This cave is the world's largest cave system. In the middle of this network is a town called Cave City. There are thousands of caves in this privately owned area, and because of this, farming is not possible here. As a result, cave tourism has become a major source of income. The challenge is that while there are many caves, there are relatively few people to explore and manage them. This increased the competition. After Floyd discovered his cave, he advertised it extensively, but people didn't visit it because his cave lacked uniqueness. So Floyd discovered another cave on someone else's private property. An agreement was made where Floyd and the landowner would split the profits 50-50. Floyd's task was to make this cave attractive, to draw as many visitors as possible. The location was ideal, just 100 yards from the highway. This cave had a unique feature, a chamber made of gypsum crystal, which was more beautiful compared to other caves. However, reaching this chamber was very challenging, and Floyd had spent months finding a way to access it. Floyd was incredibly passionate about his work. He spent up to 12 hours a day removing stones from the cave, determined to uncover the crystal chamber. On January 30th, 1925, the day he was on the brink of being stuck, he finally found the chamber. He overjoyed and spent hours admiring it, knowing he was the first person ever to see this place. He was eager to share the discovery with his family, but fate had other plans for him. On his way back, Floyd became trapped 60 feet below the surface, in a situation so dire that movement was nearly impossible. He screamed into the darkness, but after a while his cries ceased. Exhausted, he fell asleep. When he woke, he resumed his desperate shouting, but no one heard him. For 23 hours he continued to scream, throughout the entire day and night of January 30th. But his calls went unanswered. He was fortunate. 2 property owners, Ed Estes and B. Doyle, arrived at the entrance of the cave. Accompanying them was Joel, the son of B. Doyle. He noticed Floyd's coat and cap hanging outside the cave and decided to investigate. Joel called out to Floyd but received no response. He ventured further into the cave, reaching a narrow squeeze hole. From there he shouted again, and this time Floyd's voice came through from inside the squeeze hole because the cave was near the highway and had become crowded with people coming and going. Homer, who was Floyd's younger brother, had been asked by Floyd to accompany him into the cave, but Homer had refused to go with him. But now, Homer was determined to get his brother out of the cave by any means. Homer desperately entered the cave and crossed the squeeze area of the cave. He got scratches from the rough surface, but he kept going toward Floyd. Homer's feet touched Floyd's face. However, things were going wrong. Floyd was stuck with rocks pressing against his ankle. He had fallen under a pile of small stones, and it looked like they might collapse. With the small opening, there were only 2 choices. Option 1, Homer could go down feet first. However, this wouldn't allow him to reach Floyd, as his body would be blocking the way. Option 2, Homer could go down head first. This would allow him to reach Floyd, but he'd have to remove more than 100 kilograms of stones from an upside-down position. The problem was, there was very little space to maneuver, so they gave Floyd sandwiches and a lot of coffee to help maintain his body temperature. Floyd tells Homer that he has finally discovered the crystal chamber, and says that if he comes out of this cave, he will never return here again. Homer, while attempting to rescue Floyd, hangs upside down and removes stones using a bucket. As he removes the stones, more rocks fall from above, further pressing Floyd's body, and his all efforts ended in smoke. Homer did everything he could, but he too became exhausted in the cramped space and had to come back out. And when he came out, he was surprised to see that more than 100 people were watching the spectacle, and they were talking very stupid things to each other. That if he goes inside the cave, how will he save Floyd very easily? And all kinds of logical things. The news of Floyd's tragedy had spread like wildfire, and Man reporters wanted to interview Homer, and they wanted to know about Floyd. But Homer was upset. He wasn't interested in giving an interview to anyone. People outside would attempt to enter the cave, but as soon as they reached the squeeze hole and saw the situation, they would turn back and leave. It had now been 71 hours since the whole ordeal began. A reporter, William Miller, tries to interview Homer. He refused to give an interview because what he needed was not a reporter, but a friend who could help him get his brother out of the cave. In frustration, he says to the reporter,
"If you want more information, why don't you go into the hole and see for yourself?"
And William Miller agrees to this and takes a kerosene lantern with him into the cave. As soon as he enters, he sees that water has accumulated on the cave floor, because the people outside, trying to stay warm by a bonfire, hadn't considered the damage it might cause inside the cave. Upon seeing the squeeze hole near the turnaround section, Miller becomes frightened. However, he realizes that if he doesn't venture in, he will just be another bystander outside. Determined, he pushes on, crosses the squeeze hole, and finally reaches Floyd. attempting to conduct the interview. You wouldn't believe it, but even in this dire situation, Miller was trying to interview Floyd. However, Floyd was in no condition to respond. He was now also exposed to the cold, icy water. Essentially, he was dying from the combined effects of the cold and the suffocating environment. Miller was unable to do anything and eventually came back out of the cave. However, Homer felt a sense of relief seeing Miller, because he was the only person who had the courage to go inside. The rest were merely spectators, talking nonsense and doing nothing to help. Now there were two people assisting Miller. Miller published a detailed report about Floyd in the newspaper, and the coverage became national news. Updates were broadcasted every hour on the radio, and the story spread like wildfire across America. Now, everyone was asking the same question.
When would Floyd come out?
79 hours had passed, and now a third character entered the story. Robert Burden, a rescue firefighter. His plan was to tie Floyd's body with a rope and pull him out. Meanwhile, Floyd, who was fighting for his life inside the cave, would occasionally open his eyes and regain consciousness, only to fall unconscious again. Robert goes inside the cave and manages to put a safety jacket on Floyd. He also gives him coffee and painkillers to help ease his pain. Now Miller, Homer, and Robert all pulled on the rope together. It was a tug-of-war between them and the cave, with the winner getting Floyd. Meanwhile, 3 other people were pulling the rope from the other side. Floyd's body was in a horizontal position, but they were pulling him vertically, which caused him severe pain. He was screaming and shouting. Floyd begged them to stop, saying,
"It's going to pull me apart."
There was no progress, and they were exhausted from the cave. Floyd was only in pain. After 100 hours, a tired Miller went back to the office and published a new report. The article quickly went viral and became national news. When Miller returned to the sand cave, he saw that someone had installed a bulb inside. Miller takes a bulb and tie near Floyd to keep him warm. He tells Floyd, "Outside, 100,000 people know about you and are praying for you. If you have anything to say, now's the time." After being stuck for 100 hours, Floyd says,
"I believe I would go to heaven. I can feel that I am going to be taken out alive with my both feet. I kept thinking what would happen if the rock above me would fall. I kept thinking to turn my mind to something else, but it wasn't much use. I couldn't do much to help those who came to help me, but I knew that a lot of people were willing to do all in their power, and it gave me carries Tuesday morning. I thought to be myself 4 days down here, and no near freedom that I was on first day. How it will end. Will I get out? I couldn't think of it. I have faced death before. It wouldn't frighten me, but it is so long."
People were praying for him in churches, and now President Calvin Coolidge was also interested. It had become the third largest non-political story between World War I and World War II. Outside the cave, the crowd grew from 1,000 to 10,000 people. Nearby hotels were fully booked, and there was a shortage of food in restaurants. Nearby residents were charging $10 to let people sleep on their floors or even bathtubs in their homes. Yes, this really happened. Over 4,500 vehicles were parked within a 1-mile radius of the cave. After 114 hours, Henry Carmichael, who was sent by the government to rescue Floyd, arrived with military support. He was not satisfied with the previous rescue efforts, so he first surveys the cave and the surrounding area. They find out that there is a crowd of 100,000 people near the cave, and their movement could cause the cave to collapse. In Carmichael's team, there was a man named Casey Jones who crossed the squeeze area and reached Floyd, where Floyd was crying for help. By then, small rocks had started falling in the turnaround section, and suddenly, the ceiling began to collapse rapidly. Casey wanted to go back, but Floyd said he was very thirsty. Casey moved closer to give him some coffee, but when he offered the cup, Floyd refused to drink. Casey realized what was happening. Floyd wasn't asking for something to drink. He knew he had been trapped for the past 5 days and had become completely selfless. Floyd knew he was going to be trapped in the cave forever and didn't want to be alone. As soon as Casey understood Floyd's message, He quickly began to make his way out of the cave. With great difficulty, he managed to get out. Just as he emerged, the cave started to collapse, and everyone watched in horror. It had been 144 hours since the ordeal began. The route to reach Floyd had completely collapsed and was permanently sealed. This meant there were only two options left. Option 1, give up. Option 2, dig from the top and create a new hole directly to Floyd. Floyd couldn't have imagined the scale and level of the operation being carried out 55 feet above him. Several professional groups from the city were working on this. It had now become a professionally organized rescue mission. Everyone had to work as quickly as possible. Carmichael, an experienced person, had to dig 55 feet underground. He made some calculations. There were a total of 75 people in the rescue team, and they could dig 2 feet every hour. To dig 55 feet, it would take about 30 hours. But the question was, could Floyd stay alive for that long? So yes, absolutely. They started digging, and Carmichael knew this was a race against time. 2 people worked at full capacity, with many more lined up behind them. If these 2 slowed down, they would be replaced by 2 new people. Gradually, the overall progress slowed down. Interestingly, there were so many people outside the cave that if Floyd had seen it himself, he wouldn't have believed it. Practically speaking, everything was happening here. There were Ferris wheels, food stalls, families, and church groups having picnics. There was a juggler performing his show. To put it simply, it had become a carnival. At this point in the story, things took a turn. No one knew exactly how Floyd was trapped, and the newspapers weren't providing any help. Everyone's only question was why Floyd hadn't been rescued yet, and why he hadn't come out. And a rumor started to spread.
I heard they didn't even want to rescue him at all.
Another rumor was,
I heard they're doing it all for publicity.
and the rumor began spreading nationwide. Another rumor was,
I heard Floyd comes out at night and goes back into the cave during the day.
another rumor was,
I heard Floyd went into the cave and someone murdered him.
There were many other rumors as well. Some people started doing even crazier things by forming groups. One group of 3 went to a telegraph office, where one of them pretended to be Floyd. He sent a telegram to Floyd's mother, who had passed away many years ago. The workers were busy digging, trying to speed up their progress with every possible method. But things had become more complicated. Their pace had slowed significantly, and they were only managing to dig 4 inches per hour. The big question was, would Floyd still be alive? Do you remember the light bulb that was placed on Floyd's collar to keep him warm? That bulb was powered by a simple copper wire. An engineer had connected the radio amplifier to this wire. As Floyd breathed, his chest would expand and contract, affecting the copper wire. This change in the wire's flex was detected by the radio amplifier, which was able to monitor Floyd's breathing pattern. The original estimate was only 30 hours, but it had now taken 144 hours. They had only managed to dig 44 feet, and it had started raining. On top of that, there were storms and cold weather, which increased the risk of the hole collapsing. It had been 15 days since Floyd was trapped. The excitement among the newspapers had waned, and visitors were starting to leave the cave city. Yet, some people still held on to hope. Then the light bulb stopped working, making it impossible to determine if Floyd was still alive. February 16th, 1:30 p.m., Monday. Finally, a 55-foot hole had been completed, and the cave was opened. It was almost unbelievable that anyone could survive under such conditions for 17 days. 17 days without food, 17 days without water, and without the light bulb that had provided warmth. As Homer Todd peered into the darkness, he saw Floyd. Floyd's mouth was open, and one of his teeth still gleamed in the dim light, but he had passed away. Everyone outside was informed that Floyd was no longer alive. According to the reporter, Floyd had died 3 days earlier, when the light bulb went out. He passed away a day after that. If the rescue team had worked faster, Floyd might have been saved. The sand cave began to collapse again, so Floyd's body couldn't be removed. Instead, it was sealed inside the cave. The next day, Floyd's family held a private funeral for him at their home. However, no visitors came, unlike the large crowds that had gathered before to watch the spectacle. But the story didn't end there. The owner of the sand cave, not one to miss an opportunity, put up a new sign outside the cave. It read, "Come on visitors, take a look. Only 50 cents per visitor." Despite the tragic events, the cave remained open for business, and he made it a tourist attraction. In 1926, William Miller, the reporter who had covered Floyd Collins' tragic story in such detail, was awarded the Pulitzer Prize. His exceptional reporting captivated the nation and brought significant attention to the rescue efforts and the dramatic events that unfolded in the sand cave. Homer Collins was in desperate need of funds to retrieve Floyd's body from the collapsed cave. At that stage, Homer Collins began telling the crowd the detailed story of the rescue and soliciting donations. His mission was clear: to recover Floyd from the cave. "I kept thinking of Floyd, lying in the mud where he had suffered beyond our power to imagine. I would never have peace of mind if he remained there." Months later, Homer successfully raised the necessary funds. On April 17, 1927, Homer and his team resumed digging. Within a week, they managed to remove the stones blocking Floyd's body, beginning with the one trapped around his ankle. Homer and his team finally managed to remove Floyd's body from the cave. They carefully placed him in a coffin and laid him to rest at his mother's gravesite. The story doesn't end here. 2 years later, the Collins family faced severe financial difficulties. During this tough period, a dentist arrived in the area with an unexpected offer. He proposed to help the Collins family save their land from foreclosure. He gave them an offer.
"Sell this property to me and I will give you $1,000 soon."
Despite the family's financial struggles, Homer refused the dentist's offer. He was determined not to accept help, feeling it would betray Floyd's memory. However, Floyd's father, an alcohol addict, became greedy when he saw the money and sold the land without much thought. Unfortunately, the agreement he signed with Thomas stated, "Everything on this property belongs to Thomas." This meant that everything on the land would belong to Thomas. After buying the land, Thomas took Floyd's body and put it in a glass coffin for display. He placed the coffin in his cave, turning Floyd's body into a tourist attraction. Floyd's fame surpassed that of the cave itself. Visitors came frequently to see him, and Thomas transformed his struggling cave into a thriving business. And naturally, Floyd's family, disturbed by the misuse of his body, took the case to court. However, they lost the case because the agreement with Thomas was legally binding. Thomas's business continued for 2 years. However, on the night of March 19th, 1930, 2 people broke into Thomas's cave and stole Floyd's body. The body was later found in the woods, but the ankle, which had been trapped in the cave, was missing. It was evident that someone had stolen it. The identities of the thieves remained unknown. At the time, the caving industry was quite active, so it's possible that someone involved in this field stole Floyd's body and took his ankle to a museum. But there is no proof of this. It's also conceivable that Floyd's family might have been involved in the theft. But again, there's no evidence to support this. Thus, the true circumstances behind the theft remain unknown. Floyd Collins, who had originally aimed to make the cave an attraction, ended up becoming the attraction himself. His body was placed in a metal coffin and secured with chains, turning the very cave that had once trapped him into a spectacle for visitors. In the end, Floyd was more trapped than ever, his remains now a permanent display rather than the cave itself. In 1998, Mammoth Cave National Park acquired Floyd Collins's cave and permanently closed it off, sealing the entrance with a steel gate. Despite the cave's closure, Collins's family continued to contest the situation. After 64 years of controversy and public display, Floyd's body was finally removed and laid to rest in a cemetery near a church. At last, Floyd Collins could rest in peace. And you know what's most intriguing about Floyd's story? He spent months crafting that cave with his own hands, only to end up buried there himself. In a way, you could say Floyd Collins dug his own grave. This concludes the documentary on Floyd Collins. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers. Thank you all for your support. You're amazing.